If you're ready to dive in and start creating your first site in Dreamweaver, this is the place to start. In this chapter, you'll find out how to create new pages, add text and images, and set links. Come on, let's get started. Whether you're working on a completely new site like we'll create in this chapter, or you're working on an existing site for the first time in Dreamweaver, it's very important that you go through this preliminary series of steps to do what I call the site setup process in Dreamweaver. Essentially, what you do when you go through the site setup process in Dreamweaver is identify a main local root folder. And it's very important that you store all of the images, pages, and other files in your site in this one root folder so that when you transfer your site to a live web server, everything's in the same relative location. If you're new to this concept, I think it'll make more sense as we go through it. But essentially, you're creating a place on your computer that will mimic the space where your website will live when it's transferred to a web server. And it's very important that Dreamweaver understand where that folder is so that it can set links properly, insert images properly, and make sure that everything will continue to work when you do finally publish it on the web. So I'm going to spend a little more time on this process in the beginning of this lesson than I will in future lessons, but we will repeat this as we work on future sites. To create a new site in Dreamweaver, or to identify an existing folder with a site, you start in almost the same way. Site, new site. And I want to point out, for those of you who have used Dreamweaver before, there's a new little icon over here that didn't exist before, just kind of a shortcut. If you're working on a PC, you'll find this collection of icons up here at the top of the screen, but they have the same function. Now, Dreamweaver offers you this nifty little wizard for setting up your sites that will walk you through screen by screen the various elements of a site. I find it much more efficient to simply click on the Advanced tab and enter that information directly into this form. I think it's a little easier to see what's happening when you use this Advanced option, and it's definitely faster and more efficient. So the first thing you want to do when you're setting up a new site or creating a new site is to give it a name. Now, the site name in Dreamweaver is really just a name that Dreamweaver will use to identify the site. If you went through the first chapter in this series, you may remember that I was selecting different sites in the Dreamweaver Files panel. Well, whatever site name you enter here is what will be listed in Dreamweaver's File panel, and what you'll select to switch from one site to another. All that to say, you can call your site anything you want. I'm going to call mine Silly Computers, and I'm going to build on some of those silly computer pictures that we saw in the first chapter. Now, the next step is to identify the local root folder. So what you're doing here is essentially telling Dreamweaver where on your hard drive that folder lives. Now, Dreamweaver's assuming that I'm creating a new site and that I need a new folder for that site. And it's tried to help me out here by giving me a name for that folder. So here you see Unnamed Site 2. Now, if I wanted to create this new site folder in the Documents folder on my computer hard drive, I could simply change this name to something like Silly Computers, and Dreamweaver would create a folder with that name as it identifies the folder as the local root folder. Now, if you already have a folder with your site, or if you want to create that folder in a different subfolder, not in your Documents folder, then you want to choose this Browse button. In Dreamweaver, anytime you see a little icon like this that looks like a file folder, think Browse button, because when you click on it, you'll open a folder that will let you browse your hard drive. So here again on the Mac, I can see that on the desktop, I have a folder called Project Files, and in that I have a folder called Chapter 2. And I want to save this new folder in my Chapter 2 folder. Now, if you look at your Project Files folder and you have those to follow along, you'll see there's already a folder called Silly Computers. If I just wanted to use that existing site as my site, I could select it here, and Dreamweaver would identify that as my root folder. But if I want to create a completely new site, and again, I'm just selecting to deselect that, so Dreamweaver doesn't create the new folder I'm going to create inside that folder. So I'm going to use the new folder icon here on the Mac. If you're using a PC, there's a little icon up here in the top right-hand corner of this dialog that you can use to create a new folder. So you can call this folder anything you want, just like you could name your site anything you want. Now, I already have a folder in here called Silly Computers that has the files we'll use, so I'm going to call this Silly Computers 2, just to distinguish it from the one that's already there. So I've created a new folder as I'm identifying it, and now I'm going to choose that new folder. And if you look here, Dreamweaver's now changed this to Chapter 2 to my Silly Computers 2 folder. Again, this name and this name don't have to match. Now you want to identify an images folder inside that root folder. Now you don't have to identify an images folder, but there are some advantages to doing so. And you can certainly store images in other subfolders as well. But essentially, when you identify a default images folder in your local root folder, that becomes the place Dreamweaver will automatically look for images when you go to insert them, and it becomes the place that Dreamweaver will automatically store images if you try to insert an image that's not in your local root folder. You'll see this in action in a moment. But what this basically means is that you need a folder inside your root folder that you can store images in. Now, you don't have to call it images. You can call it graphics. You can call it photos. But it is pretty common to call it images. And this is where file names start to matter. From here on out in your website, all of the names of files and all of the names of folders and subfolders within your root folder need to be named with no spaces and no special characters. That has to do with the way links are set and the way they work on most commercial service providers. So I'll remind you of this as we go along, but make sure when you name that images folder, you don't use any spaces or special characters. You can use the dash or the underscore, but no other special characters. So I've now identified that my main root folder is called Silly Computers 2, and that inside my Silly Computers 2 folder, I have a folder called Images that I want to be my default images folder. And that's really all you have to do at this stage. You'll notice there are many other options in this dialog. If you've already got your web address, you can add it here. If you know that you want your links relative to site root instead of document, this is where you would specify that. But if you're just creating a site for the first time and you're just getting started, that's really all you need to do for now. Just click the OK button and you're ready to go.